So this Shabbat, friends, we are at a pivot point between two books of the Torah. This weekend, we end the book of Genesis, and we begin to make our way through the stories of slavery and liberation in the book of Exodus. Our Torah portion this week concludes with the dramatic reconciliation between Joseph and his brothers, and it plants the seeds for the stories of the Israelites in Egypt. These final chapters of Genesis that we learn together on this Shabbat bring with them both conclusion and foreshadowing. When we find him in this week's portion, our forefather Jacob is lying on his deathbed, agonizing about how to ensure the continuity of his family. He calls out and asks for his grandsons, Ephraim and Manasseh, to be presented to him. Joseph, their father, brings the boys forward. Jacob holds them close and kisses them. He places his hands on them and he blesses them, and the family has new life breathed into it through the blessing of those boys, who are remarkable, if for no other reason than because they are the first set of brothers we meet in the Bible who do not fight. As his life comes to an end, Jacob blesses the next generation of his family with his last breath. What was he thinking in those last moments? I suspect that at the end of his life, even at that moment of blessing, Jacob may have been reflecting on the difficulties of his life. Perhaps he remembered his beloved wife, Rachel, and the pain of burying her on a shallow grave on the road to Ephrat. Perhaps he recalled the tension in his relationship with his brother Esau, the years of estrangement and hostility. Perhaps his mind traveled all the way back to his childhood, wincing in pain, knowing that he was a disappointment to his father, who always lamented out loud that he had wished Jacob could have been more like his brother. But at that moment on his bed, when he looks at his grandsons, he sees in them promise and hope and an end to the conflicts that plagued his family for generations. Even then, in his frail and weakened state, through eyes gone hazy with age, Jacob sees a source of blessing for the people of Israel so potent that it remains with us still. To this day, many Jews use Jacob's own words when we bless our children on Friday nights, expressing the hope that God will make them like Ephraim and Manasseh, which, as it turns out, is exactly what Jacob hoped we would do. Our Parsha says so explicitly. Vayvarchem bayom hahu lemor, on that very day he blessed them, saying, B'cha yivarchech Yisrael, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh. It is this very phrase that many Jews say at their Shabbat tables every week when they place their hands on the heads of their sons. And tonight I want to teach you something interesting that comes from the text of this story about how Jacob taught us to bless our children. So if we look closely at the Hebrew of this verse, Bailey, you thought your Hebrew lessons were over. They're not yet. If you take a look at the Hebrew of this verse, we can see an inconsistency in how one of the words is spelled. I want you to look sort of closely there. That same word, the Hebrew word lemor, which means saying, is spelled in two different ways in the same verse. Once the normal way, lamed aleph mem resh, and once unusually, with a letter vav inserted in the middle. You can see the red letter up at the top there, lamed aleph mem vav resh. There is an extra letter in the word. Where did that letter come from? And what is it doing there? Well, there's a midrash that suggests that the Torah wrote this word in this unique way in the story about Jacob blessing the boys because it wants to indicate to us that the blessing he offered them was completely full, that there was nothing lacking. There was nothing missing when Jacob lays his hands on his grandsons' heads. And so, how did that blessing come to be filled up and rounded out in this unique way? Where did that extra vav come from? The rabbis teach us it came from the innermost part of Jacob himself. Jacob's name, Yaakov, should be spelled this way: Yud, Ayin, Kuf, Vav, Vet. But it's not spelled that way in the Torah. The text omits that letter every time Jacob's name is written, spelling it instead like this: Yud, Ayin, Kuf, Vet. This is how it should be spelled, and this is how it's actually spelled. Jacob has spent literally his whole life with a vacancy, an emptiness in the center of his own name. For his whole life, Jacob has had the sense of something missing inside himself, not just orthographically, but emotionally. Despite having lived a life of fulfillment and success, he looks back on his deathbed and he sees that for years he felt hollow. He was never able to feel that he was enough just as he was. He only noticed his own emptiness. And now, at the end of his life, Jacob experiences something he's never felt before: the ability to wish for someone else's fulfillment, someone else's blessing before his own. So what the Midrash teaches us is that Jacob prayed for the restoration of that missing vav, that missing letter, that slender line that should appear in the middle of himself, filling his up. And he prays for it to be restored, not to himself, but that it should be given to his grandchildren, so that they could enjoy a sense of completeness that he himself never could. Only by giving away the things he grasped most tightly and selfishly before, blessing, inheritance, approval, can Jacob feel complete, that he has all he needs. Only then can he die fulfilled. This moment in the Torah is the fulcrum around which Jacob's emotional transformation pivots. This is the dividing line between Israel's history in Canaan and its future in slavery, liberation, and self-determination. What links the past and the future is self-awareness and self-acceptance. The ability to acknowledge and accept that there are things we are missing. We have disappointments. We have emptinesses. But that we're not condemned to a life sentence inside them. It's paradoxical, but it is true. Our emptiness can be a place for us to start when we are ready to deliver blessing to others. We can look into the tender, hollow spaces inside to find sources of compassion and loving kindness. It's a hard and holy thing to see our own emptiness with clear eyes and to claim it as the first step toward offering a compassionate presence to others. I mentioned earlier how Jacob's blessing for Ephraim and Manasseh is traditionally used by parents blessing their sons on Friday nights. But this custom has only been around for the last couple of centuries, a blink of the eye in Jewish history. In the Middle Ages, you would not have heard those words spoken at a Shabbos table in a Jewish home. You would have heard them in the synagogue as part of the High Holy Day liturgy. In medieval Europe, congregations recited the words of Jacob's blessing just before Kol Nidre. They were placed there, I suspect, as a way to remind us that it is possible to change, that we can learn how to be selfless, even after years of selfishness and self-centeredness, that we can learn self-awareness even after a lifetime of self-deception. Jacob's blessing emerged from his ability to see himself with new eyes. His deathbed epiphany finally enables Jacob's son Joseph to reassure his own brothers that he won't seek revenge on them to fill the emptiness he felt in his childhood. After seeing his father's transformation, Joseph can tell his brothers that he loves them, that he'll support them, and the entire Jewish story pivots and changes. Joseph's family and his people prepare to move into a whole new chapter, figuratively and literally, and the book of Genesis comes to a close. When we finish reading a book of the Torah in the synagogue, we share an exclamatory prayer, Chazak v'nitchazek. Let us be strong and let us be strengthened. That hopeful prayer for fortitude seems to take on special significance here at this vital fulcrum in the story of Israel's national biography, when we recognize that real strength comes from the ability to look simultaneously inward and outward, accepting at the same time our own emptiness and the renewal that comes from a relationship with others. The deepest kind of blessing comes forth when we take our first brave steps past the dimness of our own shadow and into the restorative light and warmth of shared human presence and shared community. Friends, we're together tonight at a time of new beginnings. It's a new year in our secular calendar, a new book in our Torah reading cycle, and a new chapter in our nation's history. We will move forward together. And as we do, I pray that we will be sources of strength and blessing for one another. That is what I wish for you, for all of us as we make our way together toward a future of liberation and strength and the presence of a spiritual community offering wholeness and blessing to all. Let us be strong and let us strengthen one another. Amen.